Fascinating.
Thank you. Next week, of course, is Ash Wednesday,
Oh, yeah.
and we'll still be here if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't have any reason not to be here.
Okay.
So,
You're getting early, sir.
Are you doing the drive?
Yeah, we'll get-
I'm doing the drive-through. Some people call it a drive-by, which I think is funny, but yes, we're doing the drive-through, 11 to 1, so it
11
fits.
to
We'll
1.
still be here 9 to 10:15 like we normally are.
We can go out to the parking lot. I mean, no, can we come to the class and then go to the?
You can come to the class, and then if you give me 15 minutes, I can probably be out there. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I just want to check in with you and see if I missed anything last week that you've been thinking about. I know we just kind of roughly got through a bit of the history of Islam, but I just wanted to see if I left out anything you're curious about.
I heard stories that the prophet, when he was under pressure, shall we say, fled in Ethiopia and the Coptic churches looked after him.
I've not heard that story. The sort of the party line is he fled Mecca
Yeah,
to Yathrib, which became Medina,
yeah.
and that's where he stayed, and that's kind of the other bit. Now, as with all traditions, there can be myths or urban legends, as you like, right?
Yeah,
I hope that makes some sense. Yeah, but that's sort of all I know about it. Okay, then perhaps the thing I'd like to do is just sort of share with you that in all,
Right.
oh, yeah, oh, please, Tim.
How did the connection between Judaism and Islam? I mean, how did you recognize Judaism and Christianity as people of the book?
Oh, great question. So, part of the recitation that the prophet gets above Mecca in the cave, right? It dovetails very well with the monotheism of Judaism. And I think, as I mentioned last time, when the prophet flees to Yathrib, he's very influenced by the Jewish community until they join the Meccans and he feels betrayed. I think I mentioned that the earliest Muslims prayed facing Jerusalem, not Mecca, until 627. In terms of Christianity, again, I think because the Holy Quran has some of the same stories that you see in the Christian Bible and in the Hebrew Bible, Jesus is a prophet in Islam, and they use the word seal, like the last one. He's not the seal of the prophets, that's Muhammad, peace be upon him, but Jesus is like the seal of the miracle workers. So and they call him Reza. So they have him, and they have Mary, not as the Virgin Mother of God, right, but the mother of Jesus, and there's stories about them, and Abraham and Noah make it into the Holy Quran as well. So, I can't say like how that all worked out. I can say there's the similarities, and I think, actually, Islam has a harder time at Christianity than Judaism because there's this claim that God became embodied in Jesus, and that's not acceptable to Islam.
Did he receive the Quran when he was in Mecca?
Yes, in Mecca, like all of it.
Okay.
So the Quran is essentially finished before 622, like it's been fully received. It's not written down till, shortly before the prophet's death and afterward, right? But all the recitation happens before the Hijrah, sort of the fleeing to Yathrib.
So was there a Jewish community in Mecca that you could learn about this?
So, I mean, yes, but not as strong as there was in Yathrib. So yes. Of course, with all traditions, Jewish and Christian, right? Something I mentioned to you in Judaism, there's something called the written Torah. We've got that. And then there's the oral Torah, which is like kind of the piece behind it tells you what to do, right? There's also essentially an oral Torah in Islam. It's not called the Quran, it's called the Hadith. Maybe I should write that on the board just so you can see it. And the Hadith really comes into being after the prophet's dead, because the Holy Quran, if you've seen it, is pretty short. It's like 1/5 of the Christian Bible. I mean, it's like as long as the New Testament, which is, as you know, much shorter than the Hebrew Bible portion of our Bible, right? So it doesn't tell you everything to do. It's got this recitation. And so there's a lot of questions like, well, how shall we dress? Do we call people to prayer or do we just do them, right? And so the decision was, since the prophet is the one who revealed the Holy Quran, since he recited this, in some ways, if you don't know what to do what the prophet did. So the Hadith are a collection of things that the prophet did in his daily life that became precedent for how one ought to do things. Now, initially, there were like 80,000 of these. And then it was like, maybe that's too many of those. Some of those may not be authentic. So you can understand how the Holy Quran is like, and when I say recitation, it's word for word. So it's not the prophet putting, like, paraphrasing what God said. It's almost like the prophet was seized and God spoke directly through the prophet. The Hadith, on the other hand, is how the prophet chose to live. So it's a secondary inspiration. And nonetheless, just like the oral Torah, or the big T word we use, tradition, it's, well, here's how we do things around here. So if you're not sure how to treat daughters, well, look at the way the prophet treated his daughters. If you're not sure how you ought to dress, or, you know, do you pray on a carpet? That's not in the Holy Quran. What did the prophet do? So, WWMD, or more accurately, what would Muhammad, peace be upon him, PBUHM, what would it be? What would he do? That's the Hadith. Again, there was some argument about which ones are authentic, particularly within 100 years, but what happened is there were a few, then there got to be a lot, then there got to be way too many, and then it kind of shrunk down some, where they said some of these hadith are not authentic. I hope that makes sense. Because you just think through this, if you want things done a certain way, and the prophet did it that way, well, there you go, right? You've got justification. So there was some early squabbling about which hadith were important. Okay, I was going to talk about cosmology first, but I didn't want to do that. Instead, what I want to do is kind of skip around on my own thing and tell you that the most important thing to know about Islam are the 5 pillars. The most important thing, because the fundamental problem, as I mentioned to you last week, if you're Muslim, is that people forget who they are, and they forget whose they are. Because our chief problem is not that we're evil, our chief problem is not that we have pride or lust or disobedience, our chief problem is we forget. So to help us remember, there are 5 pillars, and maybe this is because you have 5 fingers. I don't know. 5 things to help you remember. The first one is much like the second one. The first one is called the Shahada. And this is how one becomes a Muslim. It's sort of like a creed, but it's like 2 sentences long. The first time you pray the Shahada and you mean it, you have become a Muslim in your heart. So there's no baptism in Islam. There's no like initiation rite other than the Shahada. In that sense, it's like evangelical Christianity. When you pray the sinner's prayer, when you admit that you're a sinner and that you can't save yourself and Jesus died for you and you accept his forgiveness, you've become a Christian in the evangelical world of Christianity. They probably got that idea from the Shahada. right? Because keep in mind, in the early Christian community, you became a Christian when you were baptized, right? Or then later, you got full entry when you were confirmed. Okay, so Christianity had initiation rites. In Judaism, the rite was circumcision. In Islam, it's Shahada. Now, Islam, being a Judeo-Christian heritage, also practices circumcision. If you know the story, Abraham, circumcises his firstborn son Ishmael at the age of 13. When he circumcises himself at the age of 99, right? So turns out that some Islamic communities, this doesn't really happen anymore, but in the West anyway, some Islamic communities practice circumcision as a rite of passage into adulthood for 13-year-olds.
Oh, dear.
Doesn't happen much anymore. By the way, I will tell you that this is still true that in certain areas of Africa, circumcision is a rite of passage for adults. Nelson Mandela was circumcised when he was 16. And our guide, when we went to South Africa, and this is certainly true in sub-Saharan Africa, was a Xhosa. He was from the Xhosa tribe, Xhosa, and will be circumcising his son at the age of 16 to 14. Had that treatment for himself as well. You can say it's brutal, it's their culture. That's how you become a man in sub-Saharan Africa, whether you're Christian or animist or Islam, it's a cultural practice that you can tie to religion, but it's really more cultural. Okay, so like if you go to Saudi Arabia today, do you wait for someone to be 13? No, but there are communities where that can happen.
How do they get circumcision for girls in there?
I will talk about that at the end when I talk about the problem with women in Islam that's still being worked out. But honestly, that has a lot to do, frankly. I'm going to say this as a Westerner, so nobody would appreciate me saying this in the cultures that do it. It just has to do with structural misogyny. It has to do with the idea that women are seductresses who are trying to tempt men. So the goal is you take away any pleasure they can have from sexuality, and then they won't be so tempted to entice men to do evil. That's not an Islamic value, actually. It's not. There's no hadith about it. That happens. Where does female genital mutilation happen? Mostly it happens, again, I'm not criticizing Africa, but on the African continent, not in the Middle Eastern subcontinent. Girls in Saudi Arabia do not have their genitals mutilated as part of the Saudi Arabian protocol. I hope that makes sense, what I just said. It's not an Arab value. It was an African custom. Has it come out of Africa? Yes, but it didn't come out of Islam. It came out of African culture. Some African cultures, right? And I don't want to lump them all together, right? Africa is bigger than the United States geographically, right? So just to be clear, a lot of different cultures. It happens in Christian communities, like in Rwanda, in Nigeria, not nationwide. There's pockets of Christian people who do this. And I'm sure they use their Christian understandings to justify the practice, but if we're honest, that practice was there before Christianity was. So that's kind of how that gets tied. It's something we wanted to do, and there's a religious justification for it. Yeah.
Backing up a bit, is the Shahada just the recitation of there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is prophet?
That's it. That's it. It's a little longer than that, but that's basically it.
Probably.
You ought to do it in Arabic because those are I don't want to say those are the magic words, but that's the language of the recitation. And again, like this is something that Islam has over any American Christian evangelical. American Christian evangelicals say that the Bible is inerrant. It's the inerrant word of God. It has no problems. Like all the commas and semicolons are in the right place, so we can trust it without error. The weird thing about that claim is I don't know any American Christian fundamentalist evangelicals who can speak or read Hebrew and Greek. Well, that's because God presided over the translation. Which one? It's just bizarre to me. So to be honest, Islam is more coherent than evangelical Christians. Because what Islam says, right, learn the original, that's the word of God, not the translation's good enough. Because it just isn't. The translation is not good enough if you believe in inerrancy. So Islam puts their money where their mouth is. And by the way, so does Judaism. Because if you want to be a full member of the Jewish community at the age of 13 if you're a boy, or the age of 12 when you're a girl, you must be able to read Hebrew so you can recite the Torah. Okay, so there's the Shahada. Again, the interesting thing about the Shahada is you don't just pray it once, you pray it 14 times every day, because it's a line in what's called Salat. Salat is the prayer that you must offer 5 times a day. So there's 5 pillars, and one of the pillars is we pray 5 times a day. And we include the Shahada, which is like, if I had to say, does Islam have a creed? The only creed of Islam is the Shahada. There is one God, Allah, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the Rasul, the prophet, who has revealed the Holy Quran. So you probably know about the prayers, and I'm just going to go ahead and sort of give you a couple comments on them.
Brother Mike,
Please.
I have a question. As a Catholic, at confirmation, I had to know the creed.
Yes. Well, here's the good news. There's no confirmation in Islam. It's when you pray the Shahada, and you have to know it, but it's a lot shorter.
But I thought earlier you said that there aren't any other religions where it's required to learn. Maybe I misunderstood you.
Yeah, because we had to too in the Anglican church. We had to know the creed.
Sure you did. And you had to be baptized and confirmed to have the
Right.
fullest membership. So yes.
Yeah.
But I'm saying in Islam, the only thing you got to know is the Shahada.
Oh,
Yeah. So there's no other rites or rituals. And you're going to practice the 5 pillars because that's just part of what it means to be Muslim. And so prayer 5 times a day, you're meant to do it before the sun comes up.
Yeah.
So you'll set an alarm, and it varies throughout the year according to sunrise. How long does it take to complete the prayer? All 5 of them are roughly the same length, and they take about 10 minutes, right? So, if the sun's rising at 6:20, I will probably be awake at 6 o'clock. And when that alarm goes off, it doesn't beep. It's not a beep, 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 beep. It's the call to prayer. God is great. That's Allah Akbar. Now, you possibly heard this phrase back right after 9/11 used pejoratively, that this is like something Islamo-fascists are doing. They're saying Allah Akbar, and this is hateful and threatening. It means God is great. Therefore, come and pray is how the rest of the call goes. It is chanted. It's not exactly sung. It's chanted. Happens in loudspeakers in places like Dearborn, Michigan, and Istanbul. In your home, that is what your alarm will do at 6 a.m. It will just go off to the call to prayer. You don't like put on makeup and like get all fancy unless you're with other people. You roll out of bed and you pray. So you do that before the sun comes up. You do it after the sun comes down. You do it in the morning. When I say the morning, it's like 9 o'clock, just roughly, because you'll be doing it again at noonday or at midday, and then you'll do it in the evening. So morning, night, mid-morning, evening, afternoon. That's meant to kind of perforate your whole day with prayer. And it is true in Islamic countries that if you're in the middle of buying a car and the call to prayer goes off, you stop.
But wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you have that.
If you can. Now, there's allowances made. Let's pretend you're running the 4x100 Olympic relay race and the call to prayer goes off. You run your race, and then as soon as you can, you make up for the one you missed. So there is understanding that if you have an essential job function, but essential is defined differently over there. It's like you're only going to miss it if you must, not if it's inconvenient. You will accept the inconvenience. And in some ways, I've heard Muslim families share that there's this lovely practice. You could be at the table with somebody having an argument. You will stop because that is not essential. You continue. And often, if people stop, when they come back, the
They
argument
forgot what they.
has diffused. Well, it's not that they forgot, but now because they've been reminded who they are and whose they are, it is less of an argument and now more of a conversation. Now, it would be interesting to think that at a very convoluted moment with your brother or sister or kids or whatever who drive you crazy, if a timer went off that said, God is great, let's pray, that you would stop, and then return to the conversation spiritually renewed. I mean, that is something lovely, actually, to think through.
It is lovely.
We actually build it into diocesan council in this diocese. Now, it's very rare that we make canonical changes, but I will tell you, when I first came here 8 3/4 years ago, the very first diocesan council had a very controversial piece of canonical change. The canon previously had something called the moral canon, which said that clergy cannot have a same-sex relationship and be clergy. Even though, right, that we had built some toleration in nationally, in this diocese, you couldn't do it. And so the bishop sort of did away with that canon, tried to propose to do away with that canon among with a bunch of others. That was controversial for some of our people. I don't know why, but it was. So it became this back and forth, and like letters were exchanged in advance of council, talking about the slippery slope of sin and how can we accept the gays. Anyway, this is sort of awful. And in the middle of this dispute, it was like time to pray. And so a chaplain came up and prayed a prayer from the prayer book. And I thought, okay, like that just took some of that energy out of it, right? Because we're asking God to help us like not make false choices and to consider like peace and other people. Like that just seems nice. Of course, I believe in inclusivity, so maybe that was just me. But actually, I did notice that some of the electricity in the debate was diffused because, well, we'd returned to God. So I just want to say this is really a lovely practice, this salat, that's the Arabic word, salat of prayer. Now, 5 times a day. Just to be really clear, I want to say this as we go. It's actually a little different if you're Shiite than if you're Sunnite. So most of the world Sunnite, remember the Sunnis are the ones who followed kind of the elected caliphate. The Shiites were the ones who followed the direct descendants of the prophet. Right, so there's a split. If you're Sunnite, the 5 prayers are prescribed. Like there's an app. If you go into a mosque in the United Arab Emirates, you'll see the 5 times like digitally posted nowadays. Like it would tell you when to do it. If you're Shiite, there's only 3 times prescribed. You do the other 2 when you want, which is interesting. So like if you went to a mosque in Iran, you'll see 3. If you go to a mosque in Lebanon, you'll see 5. That's one difference. Another difference, curiously enough, and this is good to know about the motions, is that there's a conviction in Islam about submission, right? I'd mentioned to you, Islam means submission. And so you probably know that most Muslims, when they make their prayers, they have brought a carpet along with them. This led to the idea that that's a magic carpet. Just to be clear, it's so you don't get dirty. There's nothing magic about that carpet other than it saves your garments. But when crusaders saw people with their prayer rugs, they thought, oh, that must be like a magic talisman for prayer. Okay, so the carpet keeps you clean. Curiously enough, though, if you're Shiite, you bring along a little clay disc that goes at the front of your carpet so that you can still touch your forehead to the earth. So you don't put your head in the literal dust, you do put it on a hardened clay disc. And if you were to go to a Shiite mosque, Iran, Iraq, for example, you would find those discs like in a cubby when you come in. So that when you put your head to the ground, it's not on the carpet, it's on the ground. Keeps the carpet clean because it's baked, but is putting your head on the dirt. So that would be another difference that you will see. Now, you'll notice, so I've talked about the frequency. I want to talk about the corporate nature of prayer too, because in general, particularly when you live in an Islamic community, whether that's in Pakistan or in Dearborn, Michigan, you're not praying by yourself unless you find yourself alone. But the goal, in fact, in making prayers is that you do them as a community. So mosques are a place where you can go to pray. Most Muslims, like in this community, do not go to the Islamic Center 5 times a day because it's inconvenient. But they do at work and in their home pray with everybody they live with. Women, it turns out, whether you're Sunnite or Shiite, only have to pray 3 times a day because women are holier than men. This is really interesting. Men have to do it 5 times, women 3. The way this works pretty much everywhere is that women pray behind the men. And this is a funny thing. Apparently, there's a hadith that this is the prophet. Now, if you're at your home, you might pray side by side. Like this is your wife and your daughters. But sort of the traditional reason for this is that when a woman bends over to make her prayers, you don't want a man looking at her from behind. Whereas we all understand no man is attractive from behind, so women can get behind the men. I mean, this is just structural misogyny. Sorry, it is. My Muslim brothers and sisters wouldn't appreciate me saying that, but it is. And it also removes from the idea, right, that there are such things as homosexually oriented people. Because in general, in the Muslim world, homosexuality is not tolerated.
Lived in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia, you will be killed for being homosexual. Your head will be cut off.
That's not the experience I had in Saudi Arabia.
It could be. Maybe I should say that.
What the Royal Commission do, or they would, because they don't have access to women.
Yeah.
There was homosexuality there, and there were some higher ups that were also involved, and they simply looked the other way.
This happens in every country, that there's laws and there's people who get out of enforcement of laws, sadly. I mean, I'm not going to name any names in this country. I don't think I need to. There are people who are claiming that they should not be subject to trial because they're too important. That is a really interesting claim in the United States of America, is it not?
Right. Absolutely.
Very interesting, and we'll see how it goes, won't we? So that's every country, but will tell you, the law in Saudi Arabia is written that you can lose your life for it. And to be honest, probably you would only lose your life if the government finds you annoying and you're not well attached.
Yeah.
But that would be true in any country, wouldn't it?
Now, there was an Egyptian husband and wife that were down on the beach. They were fooling around a little bit, and the religious police saw them. That Friday, they were stoned to death.
Yeah, religious police in any country are really scary. We like to think, oh, it's the scary those Muslim police. Just keep in mind the religious police in Spain would burn you alive. So it is tough, right? Religious police is just a bad idea, if you ask me, but I believe in separation of church and state myself. Okay, so I've told you about women have to be in the back. If you go to a mosque, in general, women have their own prayer room that is removed from the men. Not really different from Orthodox Judaism, where women sit above the men, segregated from them. Now, that's in flux, but it hasn't substantially changed. I hope that's okay that I said that.
My daughter-in-law was working in Jakarta at a very big corporation, and she's Christian, but well, no, she's Catholic. They just.
That's Christian.
They distinguish between Christian and Catholic. And she was head of a department, and when the call to prayer came, the women in her department would go to the restroom, wash their face, put on different clothes, then go to pray. Then I would have to come back, and she told me that it was certainly an interruption in business day. And she couldn't always be sure if they meant, if they would do this under other circumstances, but it gave them a break from their work day because you had to allow them to go. And it took time away from the.
And you have to do it, right? And arguably, it's probably better than a cigarette break.
Well,
You might have got both,
I
yeah.
think that was my most memorable experience, was watching people in the middle of the day say, turn around and say, excuse me, sorry, and pray. If you were in a control room or an
Yes.
outside room somewhere, they would probably be playing on cardboard boxes.
Yeah.
And managers had prayer mats in their office. And doing that 5 times a day was impressive.
It really is. I just admire them for it. We can say our little prayers in the morning, and maybe in the day you might send up a statement or a request, and maybe at night, but it's not anywhere as formal, and they're so dedicated to do it. We could hear the call in Valley, of course, because
Yeah.
that's primarily Muslim country, but they're so dedicated to that.
And it impresses us as Episcopalians often because we've so accepted the Calvinist influenced Protestant work ethic that we've decided on part of our religion as efficiency.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, when the prayer book was written by Thomas Cranmer, he presumed we would, in fact, stop every day for morning, noon, evening, and night prayers. So Thomas Cranmer picked 4, not 5.
Yeah.
If you're Catholic, not just nuns and monks, you really are supposed to do 7, including matins, where you get up in the middle of the night. Now, many Catholic people said that's just for the monks, but that's prescribed that you do it 7. So Islam has a compromise. You don't have to get in the middle of the night. But our own Protestant heritage, our Anglican heritage is not, morning prayer is nice. It's good once a month. You do that every day. That's the presumption of the prayer book. We know that it doesn't apply very well anymore. Most people don't do it every day. But that's because we've decided our work is so important. It's an interesting decision. It's not a mental decision we made. It's a cultural decision. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. We decided I'm too busy to do it. And therefore, we're impressed when somebody unbusies themselves. Often we'll say, how do you get work done when you take off in the afternoon? Well, you don't work 12 hours a day. Or maybe you do, but you've just had a longer break. Yeah, so it is an interesting thing. This is not negotiable if you're Muslim. You don't It's not recommended you pray 5 times a day. It's expected you do. Yeah. There was the mention about washing. So particularly when you make your Friday prayer, Friday is like sort of the Sabbath day in Islam. You call it Juma with a J, Juma. You might go to the mosque on Friday where you will make your common prayers, but you'll also hear the Holy Quran recited, and you'll hear a sermon on the Holy Quran. And in preparation, particularly for Friday prayers, you'll do some ritual washing. This is about, just like we use a lavabo bowl, this is about outward sign of inward reality. I'd like to cleanse myself of my worries and my burdens and my preoccupations so that I can make a fully interested prayer when I kneel to pray. I hope that makes sense. This is like pretty ubiquitous, that there's preparation for rites. In the Islamic world, particularly in the desert, water is really a precious resource, right? So the use of water to do physical cleansing and outward sign of an inward reality is expensive and important. It is true that in some Muslim communities, if there really is no water, you might ritually wash yourself with sand, but that is pretty rare. So this is part of the washing that you'll have, particularly on Fridays. It doesn't often happen 5 times a day. Doesn't often. You'd have to be what we'd call like an Orthodox Muslim. That's meaningless, but it's meaningful too. Yeah.
That's just interesting to me as a Catholic, where we were required to go to confession. If we thought because we would know, we had the list of mortal sins and venial sins. And if you committed a mortal sin, you couldn't go to communion unless you'd gone to confession.
Yes.
And at the entrance of my church, when I grew up, there were a list of movies. If you went to see any of those movies or read certain books, that would be, you'd have to go to confession first.
It's a
before you-
confusing thing, that, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
of course, and that was a lot, they don't do it anymore. I mean, I don't,
Right.
but it wasn't confusing. We were kids.
Of course. And if you're a kid in Texas, there's a list of books you're not allowed to read. It's not really any different from that, although most of us are like, that's stupid, right? In some ways, when you put a book on that list, I intend to read it now, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a child, a kid.
Well, I'll
Okay,
tell you, when
that's
Mouse
okay.
got banned, I immediately checked it out for Emery. So Emery has read Mouse 1 and Mouse 2. It won the Pulitzer Prize.
Yes.
Yeah.
And well, we just don't think kids should be exposed to what happened to other children.
Yeah.
Very odd that. Well, anyway, I obviously believe in academic freedom. So, and I understand that we want to raise our children well, but it's confusing when we ban things to me. It's very confusing.
Especially if they have an iPhone in their pocket where they can get anything they want.
I would much rather my child read Mouse 1 and Mouse 2 than learn about the Holocaust on social media, which is not edited or interviewed or in any way reliable.
Well, I gotta go read Mouse. I never heard of it.
It's a graphic novel. It's like the first graphic novel that won a Pulitzer Prize. And it's a memory of the author Art Spiegelman. His grandfather was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And so the Mouse is sort of about going from being a prominent Jewish business person to living in a ghetto. And then Mouse 2 is about that same character going to Auschwitz-Treblinka and ultimately being killed in a gas chamber.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a graphic novel, but all the Jews are mice and all the Nazis are cats.
Oh,
And all the Poles are pigs.
And all the Poles are pigs, including the Nazi Poles, because they're of lesser racial status. So, it's a difficult book, right? But it's weird that anyway, okay.
On the Salat at 5 times a day, if that includes the Shahada,
The Shahada will show up 14 times a day.
so where the other 9 come in or the work that.
Oh, you'll say it twice in many of the prayers. I mean, the prayer is prescribed what you do each day, but it's not like different every day. It's like the morning prayer goes like this. The late morning prayer goes like this. The afternoon prayer goes like that, if that makes sense. Now, you can also discuss the Holy Quran if you want to outside of that time. And there are readings built into the Juma, and there are some Quranic recitation built into the prayers, but it's not like there's a prayer book. They're set, if that makes sense. I did want to mention movements to you because Muslims don't pray like this. I think I've told you our Jewish brothers and sisters incline their head with their eyes open when they pray.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Federer said that was a tradition that became concretized after being exposed to Islam. So not all Jewish people did this, but there were Jewish people kneeling for their prayers as a reaction against Islam. Jews do not kneel when they pray. Nor do they put their head down. They look up expectantly. And as I mentioned to you, if you're Hasidic, you probably also move as you pray because you're supposed to use your whole body. Most Christians in the West do this, right? And we might kneel as well. I like kneeling, although that probably comes out of our High Middle Ages tradition, right? That you kneel before a monarch. Muslims go another step further. So there's a few movements. I can't show you all of them because I'm not a Muslim, and I'll inevitably miss one. But we did receive recent instruction on this when we went to the Islamic Center last year. Typically, the first thing you do is you just kind of stand for a second. And as I mentioned, you try to clear your head. You try to center your will. It's kind of like the prayer we start at the beginning. Almighty God, to you all hearts are open, all desires known, and from you no secrets are hid. It's a similar kind of thought, even though it's not scripted. And the first movement that you make as a Muslim is you might put your head down and you put your hands up like so, which is sort of saying, you're in control, God. I am yours, and I am going to submit to your will for me in the world. So the first sign of submission is so, after which you do what's called in yoga, the sort of the forward fold, which is down to here. You're sort of, so this is the beginning, and then you're rooting deeper down. And then, of course, the third movement is that you'll then go to your knees with your hands up and your forehead comes to the ground. That's what we call prostration, right? And that there are some words intoned in prostration. You'll come back up, right, to your knees. You'll come back up again to the forward fold. You'll go back down in prostration again. There's a moment, particularly on Friday, but also in your own home, where you will turn to the person on their knees next to you and sort of say something like, the peace of the Lord be always with you, right? And you'll do that to the person on your left as well. I'm sure you've seen videos where there's like 1 million people doing exactly the same thing at the same time. That's because the Salat movements are prescribed. There's not variance. All Muslims do these.
This is Muslims. I got mixed up with yoga.
Yeah, sorry. Because, I mean, I want to suggest to you that these movements are not, I don't want to offend any Muslim viewers, but like, it's not like the Prophet invented these movements.
Yeah.
You do some of these same movements in other religious traditions, and like particularly in the Hindu tradition, right? The forward fold. I mean, if you just went straight down to prostration, you could hurt yourself. So, like you're stretching into it, right? And the forward fold is what we call in yoga the prostration is what we call the child's pose, right? If you've done yoga, when you're on your knees with your head on the ground, that's the child's pose. And it is actually a resting position for your body. It's not a stretch, it's a way of sort of resting. Now, as I mentioned to you, we have a hard time with submission. But it's not like giving up in wrestling. It's like since God is God, right? And since the weather is what it is, I might submit to the weather by wearing a jacket. I don't say, well, what can you do? And go out in the summer heat, wearing a parka. That'd be silly. I can't control the heat in Texas. So what do? I wear sunscreen or I turn my air conditioner on, right? That's how I submit to the weather.
When I first came to this church, to your church, I grew up Catholic, so I knelt at, and went into the pew. And I noticed, like, I got some looks maybe, I wasn't too sure, and then I don't remember if it was the next time I came and I did the same thing, and I think you made an announcement that, or somebody made an announcement that it was not proper or appropriate.
I didn't do that.
You didn't do that?
No, because if I sat in the pew, I would genuflect before I sat down. The way I grew up as an Episcopalian is you genuflect. Genuflect is just kneeling like that
Yeah, right.
every time, and you do it facing
The
cross,
The cross, yeah.
not the tabernacle. I don't genuflect to the reserved sacrament. We don't do that. We do it facing the cross every time we sit down and get up. I can't do that from where I sit because it's to my back.
Maybe I did it to the host. Or where's it?
It doesn't,
Yeah.
it actually doesn't matter
Yeah,
where you do it, because in the Episcopal Church, you bring your own piety. Now, I think I mentioned to you that my first church that I was a part of, well, the one I was a senior warden at was an Anglo-Catholic church, but the one prior to that, the guidance was, in general, you stand to sing, you sit to listen, and you kneel to pray. But I don't have rubrics in our bulletin because I don't like telling people what to do.
Great.
And particularly, there's people whose knees will not support them doing things. And it's very ableist of me to say you're meant to kneel now. It actually, I think, is discriminatory to say that to people. There are other people who are very Catholic suspicious. I'm not saying they should be, but they are. And so kneeling to them feels very like papist, and they don't want to do it. So I don't want to tell them, you must do it. That's how we do it. I mean, actually, keep in mind, how did we get to female genital mutilation? That's how we do things around here. So the more we impose our culture on religion, the more it becomes an idol. Now, I like kneeling when I pray. I hope you'll notice I do it. At the collect of the day, I kneel. I don't know any other priest that does that, to be honest, because we're leading the prayer. But to me, it's the time I get to. During the prayers of the people, I kneel. I'm physically able to do it and get back up. At the 8 o'clock, people kneel for that. At the 10:30, most people don't. But I model that I'm doing it, which I feel is better than me saying you ought to do it. Because it's an option.
At 10:30, do the people stand up to sing?
Yeah, in general, they do.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, when you did your hymn at 8 o'clock.
Most of us don't.
I know, and I do.
And you know why we stand to sing? It's because it's better for your voice.
Yes, you can sing.
And we also stand during the procession of the gospel and the cross, whether we sing or not.
Yeah.
Just like it used to be when an adult entered the room, you all stood up in school. We don't do that anymore. It's not right or wrong, but like, I think because partially we've decided that adults abused children's positional respect a little bit too much.
When women walk into the men would say,
That would have been nice.
In the Catholic school, when the nun walked in, you'd stand up.
Yeah, and when Elvis came in, you stood up too, right? I mean, and when Elvis left the building, you did too, right? I mean, this is sort of the deal. So I just want to say, like, it varies by parish, but my own practice, I do like genuflecting before I come in and sit. I do.
Yeah.
I actually really don't
like-
I don't like the architecture of the chancel. I don't like that I sit in the apex of the chancel. I didn't design the building. It'd be weird if nobody sat there.
Yeah.
The church I was raised in, there were two kneelers facing each other. The priest sat in one and the intercessor sat in the other. And there was a flip down with a desk, and that's where you sat and that's where you prayed. And then when you got up to preach, you did, and then you went back to the kneeler. You weren't sitting in the bishop's chair.
Yeah.
We didn't actually have a bishop's chair at St. Albans. because the church was older than the new prayer book, so you didn't sit there. It doesn't matter. I don't begrudge it. When I first got here, I thought, I don't want to sit there. But it'd be weird if I didn't. That's what I decided. So I sit there. We don't have a kneeler here at St. Thomas, like we don't have a prayer desk. I have one in my office, but we don't have one in the chancel.
You don't have an altar voice, but
We have
you
acolytes,
just got, you have the echo.
Yeah.
and we have the verger who's like the principal altar person. Yeah.
So when you kneel, you have nothing to hold on to get up again.
No, but I'm able-bodied and young.
I
Now,
know.
in 20 years, I probably won't be doing that.
Yeah,
But I would never have held the prayer desk anyway,
No.
Yeah.
because they're a little rickety. I don't know if anybody's used a prayer desk before.
Right.
I mean, I would need to build like emergency bars onto it.
yeah,
By the way, if you're Muslim, you need to have prayer bars either.
Uh-huh.
And it is understood that if you can't do this, you are meant to do it in your heart. But you pretty well damn better do it.
but Mike, I mean, we've been talking about all of the practicalities. Islam, you walk into a mosque, there's no pews,
Nope.
No.
and
No feet.
at my age, that would be a problem.
And Islam has an allowance, you do the best you can. It does, just like we do,
Yeah.
although. Like I mentioned to you, when I took communion to the lady in the hospital, and she said, I can't have it because I can't physically kneel.
Yeah.
It was like, honey, kneel in your heart and it's gonna work.
Yeah.
And I hope that was a grace to her.
Yeah,
But she didn't want to receive it because she couldn't do it right. And this is always a thing we struggle with, whether you're evangelical or Episcopalian or Catholic or Muslim. The culture defines what's right. And when you can't do it, I'm sorry, it's called ableism.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. While we're talking about it, again, I didn't design this, but I didn't change it when we tiled the floor. I mean, you don't like changing the architecture of the church, but it would be very hard for a disabled person to be a reader at St. Thomas. It's very difficult getting up those stairs and around.
Yeah.
It's a tight turn. Now, again, I didn't build it. But I'm becoming increasingly aware that it's not great. If I were disabled, I could not even celebrate communion as a priest. Because I can't get up the steps. And like I recently thought, like I might need to have a foot surgery. I might. And what will I do if I need to do that? Well, I'd probably use crutches because I'm physically strong enough to get up the steps. But I don't know that I could go around and distribute it. So I might have to consecrate it and then send other people to do it. There's workarounds. But if you're disabled, I think you'd rather not be worked around.
yeah,
So I don't know that we're going to build a ramp up there. I'm sure we're not. But I am aware that we've got structural problems in our own worship space. And
Yeah.
I would tell you, not being critical of Islam, because we're not different. The prayer postures are discriminatory. There, I said it. Okay, now we can move on. But again, it's no different if you're Southern Baptist or you're Catholic or you're Jewish. I don't know if you know this, the only organizations that have an exemption from the Americans with Disability Act, do you know? Are religious ones. Because we shouldn't have to accommodate disabled people.
We should not.
And you don't have to. You don't have to. Now, that's a little sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a little sad.
I don't read anymore because my eyes have gotten old. And so I can't always see very well. And so, I don't. And I miss that because I like reading, but.
And Audible's not the same, although I listen to most books myself now. Because I'm on the move so much, it's easier to listen than to make the time to read.
Yeah.
So fortunately, there's workarounds like Audible that you can still enjoy a book, but we know it's not the same as reading. Like our brains do something different with words than they do with heard, right?
See the range and.
I hope I didn't go too much off tangent, but there is Salah. And like I say, there is something almost transfixing to watch 1,000 Muslims do it at the same time.
Oh,
And I'm not saying anything weird, I hope. If you watch a movie by Leni Riefenstahl about like Nazi rallies, There's something transfixing about watching a million German people goose step down the streets. That's why she made the movies. It is psychologically effective. And this is part of what Islam says. We're all prostrate, which means we're all of one family. There's nobody who is too important to kneel. If you're the caliph, or you're the emir, or you're the sheikh, you will be kneeling on the ground with everybody else. So this is, in some ways, the great equalizer of Islam.
And wearing the same clothes.
And wearing in general the same clothes, even if they have fancy stuff. So here's the Islamic chart of organization. Allah, everybody else. Okay, so there's Salat. By the way, you don't have to be a cleric to lead Salat. You do it at your own home. In fact, in most of the world, the prayer leader is a volunteer, not a paid or especially seminary trained person. The word for that person is an imam. So there's 3 imams over here. The main one gets a stipend because he organizes community life in addition to prayers. But prayer leaders don't get paid to lead prayers. So Islam is meant to be anti-hierarchical. Everybody under one God. Okay, the next thing is called zakat. We would call that almsgiving. Now, in the Judaic Christian tradition, there is this idea that you give a tithe. That's a holdover from Hebrew tradition when there were 12 tribes and one of them didn't get any land. So they couldn't grow their own food. So you brought a 10% share of your food to feed the clergy. This is a pre-monetary economy idea, right?
Yeah.
As the monetary economy idea came around, that's where we got to this idea of tithing. 10% is very easy to calculate. I have 10 fingers. I move the decimal place 1 spot. Is tithing biblical? No. Sacrificial giving is biblical. I'm not against tithing. I'll tell you, most Episcopalians don't. If Episcopalians tithed to their church, we would have no budgetary problems. Most Episcopalians give 3%. Because most Episcopalians give money to other organizations as well, like their university. Now, the home I grew up in, the evangelical home, my mother wrote 10% of her gross pay as the minimum to her church. And if she supported a missionary, that was on top. So the understanding was the tithe went to your local church, and anything you did for your university or your local library was great above and beyond that. I'm not telling you you need to change your giving habits. What I'm saying is there's a difference in how we all do this. In the Islamic world, it's not 10%, it's 2.5%. And it's not 2.5% of your income, it's 2.5% of your net worth. Which means you have to add up the 401k, the Roth IRA, your rental home's market value, the fair market value of your home every year. And your income, because it's your net worth. And what do you do with that 2.5%? In some countries, you give it to the mosque, but you actually don't have to give it to a mosque. You have to give it to people who don't have enough food, who don't have enough money to pay their rent, who need help supporting their children. So if you give it to the mosque, the goal is the mosque gives it out. What pays for the mosque? Generous donors.
Who controls what the mosque does for the poor?
Well, if there's a paid imam, then that person does. If not, there might just be a member of the mosque who volunteers to be the charitable distributions coordinator or something like this. But it's very true. You could be a member at the Islamic Center of Clear Lake. You go there to pray and you never give them a dime. But you give 2.5% to, in general, you do this to Muslim causes. Like you might give it to the Red Cross, but you might give it to the Muslim version of the Red Cross. Does that make sense? Like we have our own relief and development group in the Episcopal Church called Episcopal Relief and Development. Is it better than the Red Cross? I mean, it's smaller. less of our money goes to administrative costs. I feel good giving to Episcopal Relief and Development. Do they go around and say, we're the Episcopal Church, convert, we're giving you this money because we're Episcopalian? They don't, which is why I feel good giving them the money. Is the Red Cross bad? No, but it's very bureaucratic and top-heavy, right? 90% of your gift goes to overhead. Well, that's because they have all these people on the ground who are going around and getting services. So we've got different versions of the same thing.
The Catholic Church probably, I don't know, because I haven't been around there. I've never even asked. When you give the money, does that go to the diocese? I guess.
When you put money like in the plate of the Catholic Church, yeah, the
Yes.
diocese owns everything, including the clergy.
Yeah, so it all goes to the diocese.
Now, it's an interesting thing. Just to give you an idea, St. Paul's throws a fall festival. You're probably aware of this. It's ginormous. And it usually raises about $70,000 or $80,000. If they didn't, they wouldn't have some of the programs they have because they have to raise their own money. The diocese isn't paying their youth minister or their Christian ed coordinator. So they fundraise to pay operating bills that the diocese don't want to pay. I don't know if that makes sense. We don't send our money to the diocese. We send 10% of our operating to the diocese here. The diocese gives us no money to pay your priest. The diocese does have grants available, like we just got one yesterday, that's going to help us put a digital sign in lieu of our marquee. They gave us $8,000 for that. Not all dioceses do that, because not all dioceses have money. Ours does. They have like $3 billion in endowments, and they spend it on various things, and one is on congregational grants. In San Diego, that didn't happen. We didn't have any money. But I don't take all the money and send it to the diocese, and then the diocese pays me. The money that goes in the plate goes in our bank account, and then we send a share to the diocese, and we pay our own bills. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
The way the Catholic diocese works here is something called the diocesan service plan.
Mhm.
And the diocese tells the church how much
Sit.
people have to contribute, and if you don't make that up, then the church make it up.
That's it. So it's a much more, for lack of a better word, it's a much more monarchical understanding of money in the Catholic diocese. I mean, what do you know? It came about in the High Middle Ages. I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying it's a very top-heavy. Roman Catholic is top-heavy financially. We're more of a federalist system. So money goes up, but most money stays down. We pay for our own property improvements. The diocese holds the deed. The diocese can't just sell our property because they want to. We can sue them for that in an American civil court. So Islam, there's a money for, the mosques often have a box where you can put your money and the mosque will help distribute it. But if you know somebody and you gave them your 2.5%, you did. Who adjudicates? It's between you and Allah. Now, in a more, what do I want to say? Like Islamic majority center, there might be oversight to see whether you're doing what you should. Just like there's evangelical communities where to be a member, you have to show them your W-2 to verify you've tithed. And that's true in the Mormon tradition as well. To make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do, because our members should be the ones giving their 10%. I actually had somebody say when we invited them to be on the vestry, do I have to tithe to be on the vestry? And the answer is, you have to be known to the treasurer and to the rector. But you don't have to tithe because I don't know how much money you make and I don't want to know. But you do have to contribute. So there's zakat. Complicated calculus, isn't it? Every year sitting down and figuring out your net worth. It's sort of interesting. And you see, it's actually in some ways a little more fair than just doing income. Because if you held 9 rental properties your income could essentially be zero, but you could be worth millions of dollars. So you're meant to share of what you have. Siyam. That's the Arabic word for the 28-day, not 40, the 28-day fast during the month of Ramadan. What happens in Ramadan, remember, the Islamic year is set up like the Jewish year. It's based on the lunar calendar, which means it has fewer days than the solar calendar by 5, 7, anyway, something like that. So Ramadan, you'll notice, could be any time of the year. Like it moves. I mentioned in Judaism, they'll add a 13th month to keep Passover in the spring. Passover cannot be in the summer or fall or winter. It has to be in the spring. And the way you fix that is you add a month every couple of years to push it backward. Islam doesn't do that. So you your best time to do Ramadan is in the winter because the days are shorter. What happens during Ramadan? You cannot eat or drink when there's daylight. So it doesn't mean you totally fast, you intermittently fast. You'll get up at 5 and you'll eat a full meal. And it's actually a festal month. Like you'll do that with your extended family and your friends. It's a feast. Then you fast, and then at night you feast again. If you're pregnant, you can drink. They make exceptions for health. If you're an Olympic athlete, you're going to drink water and eat because like you need to do that. But when you're done with your obligation, you need to make up for it. So you'll observe Ramadan late, if that makes sense. Now, just like Lent, which we're getting ready to do, it's about food and water, but it's not about food and water. The coarsest observance of Ramadan is that you just fast from food and water, and when you're done, you're done. You're meant to do these things as a way of practicing discipline and of sort of fasting from behaviors that are not building up your fellow brothers and sisters in the Islamic community. So it's sort of like exercising the self-control muscle with the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that you can then use that strength at the top. I hope that makes sense. Any Muslim will tell you the goal of Ramadan is not about the food and the water. The food and the water are a means to fast from behaviors that are not life-giving. I hope any priest would tell you the same about Lent. It's not about chocolate or wine. If you did that, so what? You give up on something for 40 days and then you immediately start doing it again. What's the net change? The thing we give up during Lent or take on is meant to be a substantive life change that we knew we needed to make anyway, and now we're doing it corporately with other people before God as a gift and sacrifice. So you could give up chocolate for Lent and show God how much you love God by how miserable you make yourself. But the world doesn't need more misery, does it? It really needs more generosity and peacemaking, and the same is true with Islam. Now, you don't get to negotiate whether you give up food or drink. You're doing that, but as a means to an end.
So as a priest, what do you recommend or suggest, or what do you think is best to do to give up?
I don't dare
You don't
make
dare.
that recommendation for anybody. One year I gave up Lent for Lent because I didn't need to feel bad about myself. I
Okay.
needed to feel better about myself. So that was the choice. There's been other ones where I gave up shaving because it gets really, really scratchy for me. And every time I scratch, that was tied to I need to have this particular prayer or this thought. Outward sign of an inward need, right? If you want to give up, if you're a smoker, give up smoking for Lent, but don't pick it up again, right? Just to be really clear. If you're a heavy drinker, give up heavy drinking and then don't resume, right? Take on responsible drinking for the rest of your life and begin during Lent. Some people need the Lenten discipline of saying, no, I'm doing too much. So the answer is no. Some people don't do squat. And frankly, doing a good deed a day would be a great Lenten discipline, just one thing a day. So I don't know what to recommend. It's so contextual.
Yes.
And to be honest,
It's so personal.
it is personal, and there's nothing wrong with giving up wine for Lent, as long as you tie it, instead of having the wine, I'm going to say this other prayer, or instead of having the wine, I'm going to write a letter of gratitude to one person in my life for the next 40 days. Like make a trade, not just a stop. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think Lent is
That's a
really
very
about
good
holy
idea.
trades.
Good.
Telling you the sermon for Sunday already. So that's the deal. It all ends, you probably know this, Eid, E-I-D or Eid al-Fitr is the end of Ramadan. And you break the fast by eating a date. So the date is the first thing you eat religiously because the date is sweet. And your fasting was meant to produce spiritual sweetness, not spiritual bitterness. So that's sort of the idea.
And one of the problems with Ramadan is on a practical side. For people, it's not the lack of food and water, it's the lack of sleep.
Because you're getting up earlier to
You're
eat
getting
and you're
up
staying up
earlier,
later
going
to eat.
bed later.
Yeah.
And during the night when you can eat and meet people, that's when you go and see family.
Mhm.
And if you get an hour's sleep, you're lucky.
And it's really interesting because, and I appreciate you saying that, this is the problem Westerners have with Ramadan because it makes your employees less efficient.
Yeah,
And the Islamic response is, we work for God.
yeah.
We don't work for you.
Must be even worse, near or above the Arctic Circle.
Not a lot of Muslims live up there.
That's right.
Not a lot of Muslims in Trondheim, Norway, but if you are, then yes, you've got about an hour during the day where it's dusky. Muslims won't make you fast from water and food for 28 days. You'd be dead.
Yeah.
So it's understood you're going to have time to eat or drink something. It's understood.
Yeah.
But you really don't like Ramadan being on around June 20th.
I had a teacher who was Muslim. And she told me, and she was just with me for a year. I forget with a program, a special program. Anyway, so when it came time for Ramadan, is that right?
Yes.